My husband said he's planning to take a gation in visa to experience what it's like to be on the receiving end of another man's baseball, but I told him that if he's batting for the other team, this marriage is over. I never imagined I'd find myself in such a surreal situation, but here I am, a 42-year-old woman whose world turned upside down on an otherwise ordinary Sunday. My husband, 42, and I had built what I thought was an enviable life together. We enjoyed stable careers, a comfortable home in the UK despite the economic challenges, and were blessed with two wonderful boys aged 15 and 10. Like any couple, we had our share of disagreements, but nothing ever escalated beyond minor squabbles. Our intimate life was fulfilling and occasionally adventurous, though I'll spare you the details. The bombshell dropped shortly after I returned from dropping our boys at their friends' houses. My husband, with an unsettling eagerness in his eyes, asked if we could have a private moment. As I settled onto our living room sofa, he produced a glossy brochure advertising what appeared to be an explicit male-only gathering. With an air of casual nonchalance that made my blood run cold, he began explaining the concept of a gaycation, apparently a phenomenon where heterosexual men travel to sun-soaked destinations, fueled by alcohol, to engage in homosexual experiences for the duration of their stay. The silence that followed was deafening as I struggled to process his words. My horror only intensified when he revealed his plans to book a trip to Ibiza next year with my sister's husband, his 35-year-old brother-in-law. When I finally found my voice, I forced myself to remain composed despite the emotional tsunami threatening to overwhelm me. "I need you to be completely honest with me," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you gay? Because if you are, we can discuss this like adults and figure out our path forward." His reaction was immediate and defensive, his face flushing with indignation. "You're completely missing the point," he exclaimed, pacing the room like a caged animal. "I am 100% straight, absolutely devoted to you and our boys." His voice took on an almost evangelical fervor as he continued, "The sheer beauty of a gaycation is that it allows straight men to explore without actually being gay. It's like visiting an aquarium." I sat there, mouth agape, as he launched into what had to be the most bizarre analogy I'd ever heard. "Think about it," he insisted, gesturing wildly. "When you visit the deep, you know, that famous aquarium where you walk through the tunnel underneath the main fish tank? You observe the fish, get up close to them, but you don't actually become a fish, do you? You don't grow gills or start swimming. You never actually enter the water or get emotionally invested in the fish. That's exactly what a gaycation is, pure observation and experience without transformation." My initial shock gave way to a creeping anger. "So you're telling me," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained fury, "that you want to cheat on me with men, but it somehow doesn't count because you've invented this ridiculous loophole?" His eyes widened with genuine surprise, as if the concept of infidelity had never crossed his mind. "It's not cheating," he protested vehemently, his hands clutching at the air as if trying to grasp the right words. "That's the whole point. What happens on the gaycation stays on the gaycation. It's a sacred rule." Then, his voice dropping to an almost hypnotic tone, he added something that sent chills down my spine. "Once the gaycation begins, a man must surrender himself, mind, body, and soul, to the experience. To resist is to be destroyed." The clinical, matter-of-fact way he delivered this cultish mantra made my skin crawl. He continued explaining, with an unsettling conviction, that this was a common practice among straight men, and that he was actually late to the party. When I told him, with steel in my voice, that pursuing this would mean the end of our marriage, his reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of anger or denial, a profound sadness seemed to settle over him, as if I'd sentenced him to some terrible fate. The following days unfolded like scenes from a psychological thriller. My husband, once a pillar of stability, transformed into a shell of himself. He called in sick to work, wandering our house like a ghost, his eyes haunted by some internal struggle. The man I'd shared my life with for 16 years seemed to be dissolving before my eyes, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Our boys noticed the change too. I caught our eldest watching his father with a mixture of confusion and concern as he muttered to himself about sacred journeys and inevitable transformations. Our youngest asked me in tears why Daddy kept talking about becoming something beautiful. Desperate for clarity, I decided to confront him one final time over dinner. "What if I told you I wanted to spend a week in Manchester, doing whatever I wanted with whoever I wanted?" I challenged him, watching his face carefully. The effect was immediate, his features contorted with jealousy and pain, tears welling up in his eyes. But what he said next left me speechless. "It would break my heart," he whispered, "but if that's the price of my gaycation, then I suppose it's only fair." That was the moment I knew our marriage was truly over. In a desperate bid to understand, I reached out to my sister-in-law. Her initial reaction was volcanic. She screamed through the phone, calling me a liar and even accused me of trying to steal her husband. But within minutes, she called back, her voice trembling with apology and shock. We arranged to meet, but before we could, she decided to confront her own husband. She put me on mute and let me listen to their conversation, a parallel nightmare unfolding in real time. "Can you please explain what a gation is?" she asked him, her voice steady despite her tears. The response she got was chilling in its similarity to my own experience. Her husband calmly sat her down and began explaining the concept as if discussing weekend plans, complete with the same rehearsed phrases about surrender and destruction. But he went further, delving into disturbing territory about hypnosis and permanent feminization. He spoke of annual pilgrimages and the possibility of never returning, lost to what he called a state of permanent pseudo-womanhood. When she pointed out that willingly engaging in such acts might indicate his sexuality, he dismissed her with the same cultish certainty. "That's the beauty of the gaycation, you can do all this without actually being part of the gay lifestyle." She clarified that this wasn't about choice, it was about whether he was leaving that night or she was. His response was to pack a bag and walk out, muttering about how she just didn't understand the sacred nature of the journey. Later that evening, through tears, she told me she'd found disturbing material on his computer about mind control and forced feminization. The parallel to my own situation was uncanny, two marriages crumbling under the weight of this bizarre shared delusion. The situation spiraled into chaos with dizzying speed. My mother-in-law's initial phone call was a hurricane of rage. She called me every name in the book, from homewrecker to things I won't repeat, demanding to know how I could destroy her son's life. But when I calmly suggested she ask him about the gaycation, everything changed. Her next call came through floods of tears, the phone being passed to my father-in-law, whose carefully controlled voice barely masked his fury as he described my husband's attempted explanation of this modern phenomenon. They had thrown him out of their house, threatening to call the police if he didn't leave. Taking control of the situation, I drained our joint account, perfectly legal in the UK, and had the locks changed, a £500 investment in my peace of mind. My husband's response was a rambling text message that read like a manifesto of delusion, accusing me of abusing the gaycation to destroy his life and labeling both me and his parents as homophobic for our failure to understand this cultural exchange. He seemed completely detached from reality, lost in his own world of justifications and bizarre analogies. The most chilling revelation came from my husband's older sister. 2 years ago, at a family birthday party, both my husband and brother-in-law had approached her husband about joining some sort of online boot camp focused on BDSM and cross-dressing. He had laughed it off as a joke at the time, but now the memory carried a sinister weight. The fact that this delusion had been festering for years made my stomach turn. She shared screenshots of strange messages they'd sent her husband about awakening and transformation, evidence that this wasn't a sudden madness but a long brewing storm. As I sit here now, surrounded by the wreckage of 2 marriages, I can't help but marvel at the bizarre twist of fate that brought us here. 2 families shattered by a shared delusion, a cultish ideology that somehow convinced 2 grown men that infidelity doesn't count if you give it a special name and wrap it in nonsensical analogies about aquariums and bird watching. The hardest conversations still lie ahead, explaining to my boys why their father won't be coming home, navigating the legal maze of divorce proceedings, and somehow rebuilding a life from the ashes of this surreal catastrophe. I've already contacted a divorce lawyer who suggested pursuing grounds of adultery, because that's exactly what this is, regardless of what creative terminology my husband wants to use to justify it. The thought of the legal battles ahead exhausts me, but not as much as the thought of trying to explain to my children why their father chose a sacred journey over his family. My eldest has already started asking difficult questions, and my youngest still cries himself to sleep, clutching the last Father's Day card he made. But one thing is crystal clear. Sometimes the greatest threat to a marriage isn't the obvious enemies of infidelity or growing apart, but the insidious power of delusion, especially when it comes packaged in a glossy brochure promising consequence-free exploration at the cost of everything that truly matters. As I prepare for the battles ahead, legal, emotional, and practical, I can't help but wonder how many other families might be torn apart by this bizarre phenomenon, this gaycation that promises freedom while delivering only destruction. The hardest part is knowing that somewhere out there might be more brochures, more boot camps, more men being drawn into this web of self-deception, more families about to be blindsided by a loved one's descent into this peculiar madness.